obviously the Sahaba, they never actually dedicated, or they, like many other topics in Islam, many of the subjects in Islamic academia, there wasn't an independent subject called Tawheed al-Asma' wa Sifat. Something happened in history. Something happened in history which triggered the scholars to focus on this particular aspect of Tawheed. The way we focus on Tawheed al-Uluhiyya, and especially Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dua, we focused on it. Why? Because there are people who claim to be Muslims who have deviated in the matter of uluhiyya by worshipping graves, by making dua to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, by believing in horoscopes, astrology and so on. So there is obviously a need for us to focus on uluhiyya. Likewise, as we know, people deviated in Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah, so there was a need to focus on this particular aspect of Tawheed, to highlight to the people the grave dangers of a person violating Tawheed in that regard. Something very similar happened with respect to Asma' wa Sifat, such that it was categorized as a separate category in order for us to focus on it wholeheartedly and understand how to approach this topic. What happened is that, just to give you a very, very brief history of how it all started, the whole fitna, how it started. What happened, you see, is when the Muslim lands expanded, when the Khilafah expanded, Muslims met different civilizations, the Persians, the Romans. In particular, they met Christians, Hellenistic Christians whose traditions go back or take root in Christian theology, which is much affected by Greek philosophy. And obviously that Christianity, the Christianity that the Muslims at that time encountered, was a deformed version of Christianity. Obviously it was not only that it wasn't the Christianity that Jesus came with, it was the Christianity that was distorted after Jesus Christ, and further than distorted when the Greek philosophy had its impact on the Christian thought at that time. So what happened is that when, especially in Syria, when Muslims met the other civilization, they argued with them and so on and so forth about the attributes of Allah, about Jesus, for instance. What does it mean when we say Jesus is Ruhullah Azza wa Jal? When you say Jesus is the Spirit of Allah, what does it mean? Okay? And on the one hand, the Christians meeting the Muslims, and all of this is taking place in Islamic civilization, and that shows how vibrant that civilization was in terms of dialogues, with other faiths. So in that sort of society, you have Christians having a dialogue with the Muslims. So the Christians, Muslims are saying to the Christians that, look, Jesus was just a man, he wasn't a son of God, he wasn't divine. So the Christians will turn around and say, well, isn't Jesus in the Quran considered Ruhullah in his kalima? Isn't Jesus considered the Word of God? The Muslims will say, yes, he is considered the Word of God. In that case, is the Word of God, according to you, an attribute of God, or is it a creation? Completely separate. If you say Word of God is an attribute of God, that means it is eternal and it is part of God. And if you say it is not an attribute of God, it's separate from God, that means it's creation. Okay? So that was a dilemma, there's a challenge to the Muslims. So that the Muslims, if they were to say, okay, Word of God is eternal and is part of the Creator, it's part of the Allah Azza wa Jal, then by that logic they would also say that Jesus, since he is also the Word of God, he is part of God and hence divine. And hence the Christian argument that Jesus is indeed the Son of God and he's divine. If the Muslims were to say, on the other hand, that the Word of God is not actually part of God, is completely separate from him and is created, then that means the Quran, which we all claim is the Word of God, is also created. So that was a dilemma for the Muslims at that time who were arguing with these people. So what they did, and this is where they say that the rationalist school, a lot of people say the rationalist school within Islamic theology came to life when arguing with these rationalist Christians. When they faced that dilemma, they said, okay, the word of God is in fact His creation, hence the Quran is the creation of Allah. And if the Quran is not the creation, then Jesus Himself is divine. This was the argument. This rationalist movement started, and there are many stories as to how it all started. In the beginning, they were a fringe group. They had no influence at all whatsoever, and they were so irrelevant that the people, they would suffice by saying that, oh, this person, he's astray, don't speak to him, don't sit with him. If you see people, for instance, arguing about the names and attributes of Allah, just marginalize them, do not give them any importance, and they will die out. This is how that school was initially treated. An example of that is what happened at the time of Hasan al-Basri, as reported in one of the Salaf, that once he was sitting in his circle and a person came to him and he asked him questions about Iman and Kufr, because he had heard conflicting opinions from two different camps, the Khawarij and the Murji'ah. The Khawarij who say that a person who commits a major sin is in the fire of hell forever, and he's a kafir for even committing a major sin. Murji'ah, on the other hand, who say that if a person commits a major sin, it has no impact on his Iman whatsoever, and his Iman is like Jibreel alayhi salam. No big deal, because sins have no impact on a person's Iman. So a person with this dilemma came to Hasan al-Basri and said, tell me who's right and who's wrong. And in his circle, before Hasan al-Basri could speak, his student, Wasil ibn Ata, he just spoke up. He interrupted, not even interrupted, in fact didn't even allow Hasan al-Basri to respond. And he said, I know the answer. This person who commits a major sin, he's neither a Muslim nor is he a kafir, rather he is on a manzila bayna manzilatayn. He's a level between the two levels, so he's neither a Muslim nor a kafir. Despite of that, however, he will dwell in the fire of hell forever. Okay, and that's another discussion. But he preempted Hasan al-Basri and he gave this answer. And then what happened is that many historians consider that as the beginning of a proper rationalist movement, where this person, he left the circle of Hasan al-Basri, went to the corner of the mosque and started preaching his own theology, his own rationalist theology for the first time. So when this happened, Hasan al-Basri, he said, اعتزل واصل. Wasil, he departed from us, he left us, he withdrew from us. And from this came the name Mu'tazila, from those who withdraw from the mainstream community. Mu'tazila, those who keep themselves separate. That was, according to one account, in historical records of what we know, that was the beginning of the Mu'tazila. There's another person, obviously famous person, called Jahm bin Safwan. He was also a rationalist, and he was also a political figure. And he, like many other people, had embraced Islam. He was of Persian origin. He embraced Islam, and he would go around debating people. He himself wasn't well grounded in Sharia, and that's something to bear in mind. Most of the people who go astray are those who delve into debates and arguments that are way beyond their level, while they themselves haven't actually grounded themselves in Sharia knowledge. So this was this person, Jahm bin Safwan. He would go out and argue with people, different religions, different sects. What do you say about God? Where do you think He exists? And all of that. So once he went to a particular Hindu or Buddhist sect called, I think they're called Samanites. He went to them and said, well, to discuss about God. So, and these people, their philosophy rests on the fact that anything which cannot be sensed by five senses cannot be proven to exist. So they said to Jahm bin Safwan, okay, you believe in a God, tell me, can you taste this God? Can you see this God? Can you hear this God? Can you feel this God? If you can't sense this God in any way, then how can you prove to us that your God exists? Jahm bin Safwan went back home. For 40 days he didn't pray, contemplating just on this. And then he came up with this response and said, oh, God is all around us. He's everywhere. Okay? It's the air that we breathe, and everything around us is God. And that was his response to those people. And he was amongst the historians, there isn't a scholar in history who actually mentioned anything good about this person. Because there are people who are deviants, for instance, they have something good about them as well, something positive. The historians mention, okay, this person was a mubtadi', this person was a rafidi, but he was a great linguist. This person was a mu'tazili, but he was a great mufassir. So people have balanced biographies written about them in our historical works. However, Jahm bin Safwan has absolutely nothing positive recorded about him up until the beginning of last century, when one of the scholars from Syria, the Sunni scholars, wrote a book trying to sort of shed some sort of positive light on him, which wasn't really appreciated by the rest of the scholars. That was something very unprecedented. But generally, previous to this century, nobody had ever mentioned him with slight praise. He was always condemned. Jahm bin Safwan, he became the landmark of negating Allah's attributes. So if a person wants to, let's say, insult another person belonging to a sect which negates Allah's attributes, then this person will be called a Jahmi, even though he himself is not a follower of Jahm bin Safwan. So bad this person was recognized, Jahm bin Safwan. So these people, for considerable amount of time in the era of the Salaf, they were ignored, they were irrelevant. At the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, he had quite a few people debating and discussing with him. I can't remember one of them if it was Jahm bin Safwan, but definitely Bishr al-Marrisi. He was someone who was the figurehead of the Mu'tazili school of his time. He had debated with Imam Abu Hanifa, and he had debated with Imam Abu Hanifa's topmost student. Who knows his name? Abu Yusuf the Qadi, Faqih, the student of Imam Abu Hanifa. He had debated with him and so on and so forth. But at that time, because these people were irrelevant, debates with them will be on a very small scale. Like, someone bumps into a Jahmi on the street and he says, well, what do you say about Allah? I say such and such and such. Well, in that case you have disbelieved. End of the matter. Okay? Same thing about Malik. This wasn't such a huge thing at the time of Imam Malik. It became slightly bigger at the time of Al-Shafi'i. But by the time of Imam Ahmad, Mu'tazila gained prominence in the Islamic world. Gained prominence not by the virtue of convincing the masses of their theology, not by the virtue of preaching to the masses that they are right and the others are wrong, but only by virtue of political influence. So what they did is that they influenced one of the Khalifas of the Banu Abbas, Khalifa Ma'mun. Khalifa Ma'mun, he had great interest in sciences. He actually had sort of a library or research center established in his time, and he called it Baytul Hikmah, the house of wisdom. And one of the main functions of this institute was to translate Greek philosophical works into the Arabic language. And by the way, this is how Greek philosophical works were given to this civilization. The civilization in which we currently live, Western civilization, is built on the doctrine, on the philosophy that was translated into Arabic and then given over to these people. So we were actually responsible, unfortunately, for preserving that Greek heritage. So what happened is that because of his influence, obviously, the Mu'tazila, they had an upper hand over the rest of the madhahib at that particular time. What it actually meant, if a particular madhab, be it in fiqh or be it in creed, theological school, if they got close to the ruler, what they will do, they will try to use his influence to dominate their madhab. That's how all the madhabs and the different theological schools actually spread in the Muslim world. You wonder why entire Iran, for instance, is Shi'i. It's because of, obviously, what happened in history. When you had rulers adopting a certain creed, adopting a certain school, and they will just implement it wholesale on the population. That's why you have the Hanafi madhab, for instance, in Turkey, in India, in Pakistan. You have the Maliki madhab in Maghrib, in North Africa. You have the Hanbali madhab in Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth, and parts of Syria. So this is what led to the rise of the Mu'tazili madhab at that time. what they did, that they systematically dismissed many of the qudat, many of the judges in the Muslim world, who were questioned about their beliefs. And obviously there was a trial, there was inquisition against the Muslim imams, where someone from the office of the Khalifa will go and approach the imam or the qadi or imam of a masjid or whatever, and he will ask him questions. What do you say about the creation of the Quran? What do you say about rebelling against the rulers? Because they also believe that rebelling against the rulers is wajib, against the fasiq ruler is wajib. What do you say about a person who is sinful? Is he a kafir or is he a Muslim? They will actually test and examine people's faith, and whoever passed their Mu'tazili test will be instated as a mufti, as a qadi. And whoever failed the test, whoever refused to toe the line, he will be sidelined at best. And that will be the best treatment that people will get. The person, he's sacked from his job. That's what happened to one of the senior scholars of the time. The person came to him and said that, the Khalifa is asking you to submit to this doctrine, and if you don't, he will cut off your the stipend that he gives to you on a monthly basis. And he said that the rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and shut the door on his face. That was the lightest treatment that he received. Other people were imprisoned. If you read the historical accounts, especially what happened in Egypt, mosques, it was placed on top of, like, as you enter the mosque, it was like written on the doors that the Quran is Mcloughlin. Quran is the creation of Allah, it's not a literal speech of Allah. And obviously the jails were packed up with Muslims and imams and qadis and scholars and muhaddithin, whoever refused to assign himself to that view. So much so that obviously the prisons became overcrowded and people actually died in prisons because of it. Other scholars, they were basically just brought into the presence of the Khalifa, and they were beheaded, and their heads were placed on a spear in the center of the Baghdad city for everyone to see, that whoever doesn't toe the line with the Khalifa on this particular doctrine, such and such will happen to him. And in these sort of circumstances, you can imagine very harsh circumstances, virtually the entire Muslim world submitted to the doctrine of the state, including the scholars, including one of the great muhaddithin, many of the great muhaddithin. Yahya ibn Ma'in, for instance, very, very famous scholar, very great muhaddith, critic of hadith. Really, if you study hadith, he is an imam. He is an imam. And many other imams like him. When they were put to the test, they use white lies, for instance.
The issue about the fingers.
About the fingers. So when he was brought into the presence, of this inquisition, so he was asked, what do you say about the Quran? He said, I believe about Injil and Torah and the Quran, that these three are created, referring to his fingers. Okay? Obviously he's doing that to save himself, but that didn't help the wider community of Muslims, because they all think, oh, even Yahya ibn Ma'in believes this now. Okay? So everybody, all the major scholars of that time, they surrendered to the demands of the state, except one imam. Except 3-4, but he was the most prominent. Okay? Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Right? He was obviously imprisoned. He was once imprisoned. Well, in fact, when Ma'mun was alive, I think when Ma'mun died or someone else, I can't remember. It was the time of Ma'mun, was the Khalifa after him. But once, people, when the Khalifa heard that this person, Ahmad Hanbal, is refusing to surrender, he sent his men to Ahmad Hanbal and his companion, Nuh, or was he a student, I can't remember. And, he said, okay, send these guys to me. So while Imam Ahmad was on his way, Imam Ahmad made dua on his way that, oh Allah, do not let me see him. And so when Imam Ahmad was on his way, this person died, and so Imam Ahmad was brought back and just held in custody. Then there was a time when Imam Ahmad was expelled. There was a time when he was taken in captivity again. He was lashed until he fainted and dropped. And after all of this, after all that he bore at that time, not only the fact that he had to face torture, but also the fact that he was betrayed and he felt let down by his own friends, very close friends who were equally imams of his caliber in his time, like Yahya bin Ma'in and others. He was really let down by them, and he was so angry that on his dying bed, when Yahya bin Ma'in came to him, Imam Ahmad, he refused to say salam to him and he turned away. Okay? And even though they had their justification, they would say, well, Ammar was also tortured at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that except for those whose heart is at ease with Iman, okay, except for the one who is compelled while his heart is at ease with Iman. So the scholars use this justification to say that so long as our hearts were at ease, we are not to be taken into account for what we say in compulsion. And Imam Ahmad did not buy that definition of compulsion. He said, his argument was that Ammar was tortured, and his family were tortured. His mother was tortured until she died. Yet these people, they only received a threat of torture and they surrendered and gave in. So this was the argument of Imam Ahmad. For that reason, he wouldn't narrate hadith. He considered Yahya bin Ma'in matruk in hadith, in the sense that his hadith are not taken because of this. But obviously, Imam Ahmad's criticism is widely rejected. In fact, I believe unanimously rejected, because Yahya bin Ma'in is indeed one of the great imams of this ummah. And really the dispute between Imam Ahmad and Yahya bin Ma'in was over how to deal with this fitna, and they disagreed. But the point is, again, we don't want to obviously divert from the topic. The point is, it was a great fitna at that time, where it is said that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal saved the day the way Abu Bakr saved the day in the day of Ridda, the day of apostasy, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And the surrounding tribes, they saw this opportunity to say, okay, the big man is now dead, so we can claim independence. We can be free. We don't have to give any zakat or any tax or anything to Abu Bakr. So some of them obviously refused to give zakat. Others, they openly confessed disbelief. So at the end, Abu Bakr, he said to his companions, I'm going to fight these people and bring them back to my obedience. Bring them back to the obedience of the Khilafah. And Umar ibn Khattab and the rest of the companions, they were against it in the beginning. They said, how can you do this? These people say La ilaha illallah, and they pray. How can you fight against them? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he was the only one who challenged all of the companions. And he said that I will fight anyone who distinguishes between salah and zakat. Meaning the one who doesn't pray to Abu Bakr is beyond the pale of Islam. And the one who refuses to give zakat, despite of having the zakat demanded from him, he's like the one who refuses to pray. And he's going to fight both. So when he said that, Umar radiallahu anhu and the rest of the companions, they all agreed with Abu Bakr that he is right, and that the people who are leading the banners of apostasy must be fought and brought back to the obedience of the Khalifa. So Abu Bakr was the one man, alaykum as-salam, who faced the opposition in his time and saved the day for the Muslims. Likewise, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal is considered as the second Siddiq, the second Abu Bakr, who saved the day for the Muslims by being the one man who resisted all the attempts by the state. He underwent torture, he suffered even the fact that he was let down by his own companions and everything else. He obviously went through all of this, but he saved the day. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obviously He replaced all the evil khulafa with a Khalifa Al-Mutawakkil who was lenient, not only lenient, but he inclined towards Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So he stopped all the inquisition, and in particular he wrote to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal saying, you tell me who of these people should I instate as a qadi and who I should remove. So Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal would write a letter to him and say, so and so from Iraq, he's a Jahmi, do not put him in that position. So and so, he's a Jahmi, do not take from him. So and so is a Jahmi, and so on. So from then on, obviously Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they came back into power, and it wasn't that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he took the opportunity and he went after all the people who tortured him and so on and so forth in the beginning. Like, he left them on their own, of course, and he himself, he didn't take any bounties from the ruler, he didn't seek any closeness from him, unlike his rival Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, who was the chief qadi, the chief instigator of fitna against Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal, was very close to the ruler, and he's the one who wanted the ruler to kill Imam Ahmad. But unlike Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, Imam Ahmad didn't go after him. In fact, he didn't even get close to the ruler, despite of the ruler making many advances to him and say, look, here's a gift, why don't you come to my court, why don't you come and sit with me and we can have a chat and you can guide me regarding ABCD. Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal, he had a very strict attitude of not sitting in the company of rulers at all. Inshallah, we can do a whole conference on Imam Ahmad at a later stage. But the point is, this was when the Ahl Sunnah will triumphed over Ahlul Bid'ah. This is when the Mu'tazila, they were defeated, and they basically they got restricted to their own ivory towers, writing or perhaps rewriting history as to what happened and what didn't happen. Okay? Because then they're being cursed. Now Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, for instance, who was a leading scholar at one time, when Imam Ahmad Hanbal, with him, when Allah gave victory to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, there was nobody to pray over Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad. There's about 2-3 people just prayed over him. He was a very unpopular person. Many other people at the time, when Imam Ahmad passed away, people actually came out at the funeral of Imam Ahmad cursing his opponents, like Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, Al-Karabisi, and many others. So that was sort of a prophecy, rather not a prophecy, but something which Imam Ahmad Hanbal said before he passed away, that between you and us, he said to Ahl Bid'ah, say to the people of Bid'ah, that the deciding day between you and us is the day, as the Yawm al-Janaiz, the day of funeral. That's when the public support will demonstrate who is on the truth and who is not. So that's when Imam Ahmad passed away, the people they spilled out on the street, and for days Baghdad was shut. People, as the furthest corner of the Islamic Khilafah at that time, were praying over Imam Ahmad Hanbal, and many things, many stories. I mean, it's a very legendary janaza, very legendary funeral Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was given. At that time, what happened? There were people on the fence. So you had the sort of traditionalist movement which Imam Ahmad Hanbal represented. Okay, so if you look at the whole picture, we have two movements inside. The rationalists, represented by the Mu'tazila, who say, hold on, let's put the book of Allah and the sunnah of His Messenger to the side, and let's use our minds, our intellect, to establish some realities. Okay, and then whatever of the Quran and the sunnah doesn't fit the bill, doesn't fit that reality, we seek a different interpretation. They didn't say we reject it. Remember, Mu'tazila never said, this verse in the Quran is problematic, so we're not going to believe in it. They never said it. And no one professing faith in La ilaha illallah will say it. And he had many people, many ubbad, many pious people amongst the Mu'tazila, by the way, who had respect for the Quran, in the sense that they would wholeheartedly respect the Sharia. So what they will say, okay, this verse, for instance, contradicts our intellect, so we will reinterpret it. Or this particular hadith, it contradicts our intellect, so what we'll do, we'll either reinterpret it, or we say it is weak, or if it's considered sahih, we'll say that it's not only narrated by one person. It is what is called hadith ahad. It's narrated by one person. And one person, even if he is trustworthy, even if he is an excellent memorizer of hadith, he is still a human being, and he can still make mistakes. And therefore, any tradition which contradicts their intellect is subject to what? Is subject to doubt or speculation. Okay? In fact, everything, as far as they're concerned, everything is doubtful in the Quran and Sunnah until it lives up to the rational test. They put it to the rational test. If it passes, then they accept it. If it doesn't, they reject it by reinterpreting it. This was a rational school. The Ahl Sunnah school, on the other hand, was the traditionalist school. The traditionalists. And these people were obviously those who would champion the cause of the Quran and Sunnah. They will read the Quran and they will believe in it wholeheartedly, without feeling the need to reinterpret absolutely anything. When did I start? When did I start? 1:15 I started now? Okay. So the Rationalist movement, they would give priority to reason over text. The Traditionalist movement will not find reason contradicting the text at all. Yeah? I didn't say, you've got to pay attention here, I didn't say the Traditionalist movement give precedence to text over reason. Didn't say that. I said the Traditionalist movement from the onset do not find any contradiction between reason and text.